Greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. As you can tell from the title, I'm continuing my reviews of Game of Thrones Season 1. We're now on Episode 4, Cripples, Bastards, and Broken Things. And as I keep saying, the plot keeps thickening as with each episode, the stakes and tension continue to rise. Now, an interesting thing, like in this episode, this is going to be the first appearance of Jerome Flynn as Bronn, even though he's just going to be a background player in this episode. The next couple episodes where his character will start to be grown, and it is the last appearance of Margaret John as Old Nan, because she sadly passed away in February of 2011, and she was subsequently written out of the show, which is a shame because she could have been used sparingly in the next couple episodes and then part of the next season, but it is what it is, and it's better that they don't recast and just have the little bit that she used set the stage and just have her be an off-camera character until what happens next season. Now, this episode, we got 5 major threads that are weaving all throughout, but the last one is going to be our cliffhanger. Now, the first thing is what's going on across the narrow sea. And before I get there, just a reminder, if you want to support the channel, the Patreon and PayPal links are down below. If you want to do continuous support, go to Patreon route. You will gain access to videos early and also get to request videos in the future. And if you just want a one-off support or a one-off request, go the PayPal route. As I was saying, across the narrow sea, the Khalasar arrives at Vas Dothrak, which it's a nice little shot the first time we see it, but it's not how they kind of build it up. But I guess it's what you kind of would expect with Season 1, with the budget is down, and it works. But of course, if you go back watching it from the previous seasons, going back, I guess you're going to be like Viserys, like, this is it? This is their grand city? But of course, Viserys is used to the big cities, like the free cities, and then of course, the cities of across the narrow sea, especially the city of his ancestors. If you're used to all that, I guess, by comparison, Vaes Dothrak is a little bit down. But the thing we don't really see, at least in this episode, is the fact that Vaes Dothrak is where all the Dothraki take the plunder that they receive and store it, essentially. We don't really get that vibe here, but it's Season 1, the budget isn't as grandiose as it's going to be for later seasons, so give it a pass. It's just a nice little thing, and then we just see the tents like we did before. Use your imagination. Now we see Viserys continuing to grow impatient because Khal Drogo is dragging his feet and not giving him his army, but as they say, the Dothraki do everything in their own time. He gets into another argument with Dany because Dany sent one of her servants. She sent one twice. Once to seduce him, which it's a nice little moment because on the one hand we know why that scene's in there, to get the daily dose of TNA. But also, it's a nice little moment where we see Viserys not fully a dick. Still a little bit, but he's not fully. But it's the next time we see him where he's dragging the servant by the hair and like, you dare her to command me. And then gets impatient with Dany after she insults him by saying you're not worthy of a braid, and then she gets smacked again, his whole you've woken the dragon. Then she strikes him back with some jewelry, and like, that's the last time you've laid a hand on me. So nice to see Dany actually growing a spine and not letting Viserys walk all over. Earlier she has a conversation with Jorah about the dragon, and he's like, Rhaegar was the last dragon, which is a prelude to a line he's going to say later about Rhaegar. But of course we all know so far Rhaegar was the last dragon. Viserys is like the shadow of a serpent. Nice little way to put him. That he's one of those guys you look at him like, yeah, he should not command. If we've seen in the previous episodes that Viserys should never be king, this episode really does cinch this. He should never be king. And what's going to happen to him, I believe, in the next episode, going to be well deserved. Now, up on the wall, we're finally introduced to Samwell Tarly, Jon's soon-to-be best friend, formerly of Horn Hill. And the way that they introduce his character, and the acting with it, is excellent. The way that they introduce him, you get his character right away. You can see he's a craven, he doesn't belong up there. And all throughout the scene where Jon is defending him from attack, you're wondering, why would such a craven go to the wall? Especially a highborn. We can understand other highborns go there, like Jon, he's a highborn bastard who was actually raised with his trueborn siblings. You get why he went, no place for them because of his stepmother. We get why some of the second or third sons would go, nothing to inherit and other reasons, earn what they have there. We understand why a lot of the other people go there, because it's either that or death, or they lose a hand, they get castrated. But Samwell's like, why would he go there? And the scene where he explains to Jon why he decided to go, you start to see some of Jon's growth from the previous episode where he's listening, and that growth does continue after that. Just the way he's listening to Sam, and you can really feel the fear and pain in Sam's voice, of the fact that he's talking about what his dad threatened to do. His dad threatened to essentially take him out in the woods, kill him, and tell the rest of the family it was an accident. Where's Sam? His horse threw him. What's for dinner? And it's just like, oh my god. Now, they do abridge that story a little bit, because in the book it's a lot more elaborate and a lot longer. And the fact is, his dad waited. They cut this out a little bit, but his dad waited until he had a second son to do this to Samwell. And then waited till the son was getting up there in age, and then Sam was approaching his name day. And then he did his 18th name day, of age name day, and then did this. It's the same thing, but they give a little bit more context. Because without mentioning the other siblings or the fact he has a younger brother, it's one of those things like, why would he do that if that's the only son? And of course, it's one of those things, it's the son I had, not the son I wanted. But given how House Tarly is and how we're going to see his father is, you can kind of see why they decided, or why his father decided to do that. And then of course, some people are going to wonder, why didn't he send him to the Maesters? Lord Tarly is not the type of person to send his son there, that he doesn't think he should be doing that. Which in the books is going to come up with another plot thread. They kind of dropped this plot thread with it from the show, but later on when we actually do see Lord Tarly, the look that he's giving his son kind of says it all. But we'll wait till where we get to season 6, I believe. Or maybe that's season 7, I forget. It's been a while. I'm confusing plot points there. Now, of course, Jon and the others do protect Sam from Sir Alliser, both on the battlefield, and then when one of them, should I say the training battlefield, and then one of them is like, yeah, I'm still going to do what Sir Alliser does, they pull a little soap party action with him. It's a very brief scene, but I do love how this scene sets up with the fact that Jon has begun to change, where they basically tie him down, put a rope in his mouth to keep him from screaming, and tell him, you're not going to lay a hand on Sam. And to add to it, they actually have Ghost sitting on his chest. Now, with what Ghost does, it's a little book accurate, because Ghost is not supposed to make a sound, hence why he unnerves people, because he's an albino direwolf. That alone is going to do it, but the fact he doesn't make a sound. But of course, for this season, since they used actual canines, it's not something very realistic you can do. I mean, because I think it's kind of hard to get them to snarl and then look at. I mean, you could have had Ghost look at him like this, but it might have been just as unnerving, but they decided to actually have him go like that with the actual threat display. And of course, you have to make him have noise, so it's one of those things like, looks better on camera, book accurate. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. But I would love to have seen how just Ghost looking straight at him would have looked. Maybe it didn't test as well on camera, I don't know. But he gets a desired effect. The scene's very brief, but it works, and Jon is showing he is starting to mature and that he has his brother's backs. Now, of course, this pisses off Sir Alliser, and I think I've already gone into why Sir Alliser has that bias against Jon. Although, he does give both Jon and Samwell some good advice in his last scene in this episode, and that is that they've never known the true cold. They've had brief summers, they've had brief winters. It's been a while, they've enjoyed the long one, but they've never known true winter until they've been north of the wall and arranging. That is the true winter. Telling the story about the snowstorm, having to eat their horses, and then having to pull a Donner Party. Oh yeah, just the way the actor to play Sir Alliser sells that. Oh yeah, and the way that Jon and Samwell react. Sir Alliser can be a dick all throughout the show, but this is one of the times where he is kind of a dick, but he's doing it for the right reason, because he's trying to make sure that they all understand, hey, once you graduate and you're actually men of the Night's Watch, this is what you're getting into. Up in King's Landing, Ned is continuing to have to deal with all the politics and shenanigans at court. Littlefinger telling him who's spy. Oh, that's one of Varys's, that's one of the Queen's, that one's mine, just so you know. And he's continuing to look into what Jon Arryn was doing before he died. He talks with Maester Pycelle, which this scene really does show a little bit more into Pycelle's character. And I'm going to be honest, this scene combined with the first time we actually saw him, I had a feeling from the get-go, I was like, this guy is really selling it. I mean, it seems like he's overacting, but I'm like, something like this would have to be deliberate with how good of an actor this guy is. So he's probably doing an act as the character doing an act. And of course, as we find out in the later season, it's true. Now, they cut the scene that he comes out and actually says it wholeheartedly, which I'll get to that if we ever get to that episode. But there is another episode where we get a little shown, and like, oh yeah, very subtle to show that he actually is acting. But his little conversation, where he tells him, oh, you seem fine one day, and then the next day gone. He came to me for a book. But the thing in between those two things, when Ned asks Maester Pycelle why Jon Arryn came to him, and just the way that Pycelle takes it, he thinks that he's asking why is he coming to him for advice. He gets all upset because I am the and Ned quickly like, no, what did he come to you for advice for? We're like, oh, for a book. It's a very dry, ponderous tome, as the Grand Maester puts it, and it's about the houses of the Seven Kingdoms and their line of descent. This lord married that lady, they had this offspring, they look like this, they lived that long. It's a very interesting reading, and it's one of those things like, why would Jon Arryn go for this book? Now, keep that in mind, it's going to keep going. And the last thing that he said was, the seed is strong. Now, keep those two things in mind if you haven't watched the episodes and you're watching them together with me, because they are going to pop up and be important. And he also finds out that Jon Arryn was going to a blacksmith. He goes there, and we're introduced to Gendry. And the way that Sean Bean sells this, as he's watching Gendry speak and watching him move in character, you can already tell from the way he's moving that he sees the things going like, I know this face. And then the ending of the scene when he goes back to Jory, it's all you need to know is like, what'd you find? Robert's bastard son. And of course, he's going to play, foster uncle to him, because he's like, if that boy ever wants to wield a sword instead of forge one, send him to me. Him keeping his promise before he even makes it. Of course, here's a nice little moment between Ned and Arya, where he finds Arya doing some of her lessons from her dancing master. And there's a nice little moment where they're talking about, you'll have children, you'll be a lady. No, that's Sansa. I'm not like that. Just the subtle way Sean Bean plays this, you can definitely tell he's still acting with the backstory material he was given for his character there. It's very subtle. You can see a little bit of pain there that he's trying to mask behind love for his daughter. And you can definitely tell that he's comparing both his sister to his daughter. How similar Arya and Lyanna are. It's a nice little touch there. It's one of those things you might not notice the first time you watch the show if you watch the show without reading the books, and then you go back and read it, or you're watching the show a second time after watching all of it in succession. It's nice little moments like that make rewatches fun. We get the beginning of the tourney, and Littlefinger is introduced to Sansa. And this scene is a little creepy, but it's even creepier in the books. Now, this is the beginning of him basically creeping on Sansa and wanting to marry her, kiss her, and all that. But in the books, his first line to her makes him even creepier. Like, your mother was my queen of love and beauty once. Which, of course, this is the beginning of him not only creeping on her, but the weird little dynamic where one moment he's seeing Sansa as the daughter him and Cat never had, and another moment he's seeing her as a Cat stand-in. It's weird. There's a lot of Freudian stuff going on in Littlefinger's head, and they only touch the bare surface of it in the show, but it's enough there to get across in the visual medium. And of course, Littlefinger also gets some extra dialogue here because of some filming delays, and that is the story of how Sandor the Hound got burnt by his brother the Mountain, who we see in this episode, because the Mountain kills the squire turned knight that Ned wanted to talk with. So that little plot point. And before we get away from it, as I was saying, the story was originally scripted like the novel where Sandor tells it to Sansa. And it was used as Roy McCain's audition tape, which is on the DVD, so it's not all lost there. Now, filming delayed due to weather, and the current version was shot during pickups. And you watch that scene, it does kind of feel like a pickup one that was just thrown in there at the last minute. Like, okay, what are we going to do with this scene? We need it. Pickup shots, and we do that. Alright. Yay. It doesn't hurt the scene, but you can tell that's not how they originally wanted to do it. And it's a little weird that Littlefinger would be giving her that info, but maybe he's trying to test Sansa, see if she'd actually talk about it, and also see her reaction to the secret that he gives her, playing the field for later, as it were. And there's a nice little scene I actually forgot about where Jory is taking a message to the king, where he's in his chambers, preoccupied with several ladies in waiting, as it were, and Jaime standing outside like a glorified sentry, as Robert put it once. And Jaime's like, how many do you think are in there? He never gives a direct answer, but I'm guessing at least 6 or 7. But him and Jory have a nice little moment where they're talking about how they met before, and that they met on the battlefield during the Greyjoy Rebellion. And Jaime seems a little nostalgic, just a little bit, because they're talking about fighting and it was a rebellion and all that. And it's a nice little moment, but it ends with Jaime being his usual self, because he has to be a little bit of a prick towards Lord Stark because of what Lord Stark did to him and all that, which makes sense. But it's one of those things that you're like, how are we ever going to like this character a little bit? But once we find out more about his backstory, we will. And I do like that they include little moments where you actually see his other side come out, and you can see he's a little likable, so he's not 100% a dick, as a certain Marvel character would say. And then the last 2 ones involve Tyrion. We first see Tyrion return to Winterfell, and he receives a cold welcome. Now, in the show, they never fully address this meaning, but when you look at Robb when he's sitting on the Lord's throne, you can see his sword is across his lap, steel bared. Now, the significance of that is that means that the Lord is refusing the right of guest right. Now, guest right, they don't really mention it this early in the show, but it's going to become important by the time we get to Season 3, and the very infamous moment that there have been thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of video reactions of people that already watched the show or read the books when they're watching the show, with people that haven't done either, seeing the raw reaction to the penultimate episode of that one. Those of you who have heard of the show and not watched it know probably what I'm talking about, just in a bare sense, but those of you who have watched the show and read the books, you definitely know what I'm talking about. I'm just keeping it loosey-goosey for now. Let's just say it involves a wedding and some musicians. That's all I'm going to say about it. But the right of guest right, it's a very, very special right that's ingrained fully in the culture, and it's something that both the Southerners and the Northerners both value. And it is that once someone has eaten and drunk beneath your roof, they are granted certain protections. Like as a host, you are not to harm your guests. Now, once they leave and they're no longer your guests, they're fair game. But as long as they are underneath your house, they are protected by guest rights. It means you won't harm them, and you got to make sure the harm does not come to them. Now, with the steel bared across his lap, Robb is essentially refusing the right of guest right. That's why he has to say outright that, the Night's Watch is welcome here, and then Tyrion's like, but not me. Now, given the conversation that they all had in the previous episode, you can see why he's refusing Tyrion the right of guest right. Because it's like, hey, if he's a Lannister, we don't know if he was in on it, so we're not going to have him here. Now, he does relent a little bit when Tyrion gives Bran the gift that he brought, which was the saddle, based on the one that he designed for himself, that Bran should be able to use. I mean, you got to have a specially trained horse, but he will be able to ride again. And of course, Tyrion sees right through him and is like, don't spare me your false courtesies, I'll just go to the brothel on the outside. Now, Tyrion calls Robb a boy here. Now, Robb is in his late teens, maybe early 20s by the time this show is set. This is one of those aspects of the context is changed by them aging the characters up. In the book, with him being in his mid-teens, 14, 15-ish, him calling him a boy makes a little bit of sense, because even though he is almost a man grown, by the context of everything, he still is a boy. And I am using it with that little bit of a draw in there to emphasize the fact that that's essentially what he's calling him. Now, I can tell you, as someone who has been called a boy at work, with little before it, despite the fact I'm a 33-year-old man, I do look younger, clean-shaven, I will say. It stings when you are called that by someone older than you. Now, the person that called me it, not to go into that whole story, was vastly older than the age difference between Tyrion and Robb is supposed to be. But it still stings. And him as a Lord of Winterfell definitely must sting. Especially more so on the show's version, because he's an adult being called a boy. So I can see why he's still giving him the stare there. Excellent acting on that part, I'll give him that. And of course Tyrion has a nice little moment with Bran, and he says, the famous line that the title comes from, I have a soft spot in my heart for cripples, bastards, and broken things. He has a little conversation with Theon about Ross the prostitute that he already had a little gist with in the first episode. And he does do some little comments to Theon, which I do like this moment, because it begins the foreshadowing for what's to come next season. You know, playing on him, if only your father could see you now. Don't worry, I'm used to disappointing my father. And there's also some foreshadowing about Bronn having his green dreams. So a nice little thing there. That's actually how the episode, this part of the episode's plot opens. It's a nice little bit there. Now, the next time we see Tyrion is not until he's at the end of the crossroads, where guess who happens to be there too? Catelyn. Now, she's still in her little disguise, I'm just traveling with my father. And that whole ruse is blown away when Tyrion sees her and is like, Lady Stark. And this leads to a nice little scene where the plot is about to jump up fast and about to go into the danger zone, as the late Macho Man would say it. Because Cat calls out everybody that she recognizes there that's either a bannerman of her father or loyal, and points out the fact that Tyrion, as a Lannister, conspired to kill her son Bronn twice. And that in the name of the king, arrest him, and they do. And that is how the episode ends. And I love the way that it's played here, where they all pull it out, and Tyrion's looking around like, oh crap. And this is gonna push the plot forward for the rest of the season, because this is the moment that really begins what will become known as the War of the Five Kings. This moment here. And I know some people will say that Catelyn sucks for this, and I'll say to a point she kind of does. But looking at it through the lens of a mother that is doing this for her kids, I kind of understand it. But still, at the same time, even if they suspect the Lannisters are involved with this, they don't know which specific Lannisters are involved. Could have been Tyrion, could have been the Queen. Now, as we know, which Lannisters pushed Bran, but at this point in the show, we don't know which one sent the cutthroat. But as I already went into the last episode, it turns out it's technically not a Lannister with the name attached. If you want to know that one, see previous episode. Now, some interesting little trivia I pulled from IMDb here is that when Viserys is reciting the names of the dragons whose skulls were in the throne room, he mentions Vermithrax, who is the name of the dragon in Dragon Slayer, who Martin has said was the best filmed dragon of all time. I still haven't watched Dragon Slayer, so no comment on that. This is the first mention of the Faceless Men and Dragonglass, along with Mance Rayder in dialogue, thanks to Sir Alistair on that one. I caught that, actually. I'm surprised I didn't bring it up then. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And then, of course, Tyrion also mentions the first little foreshadowing of Wildfire when he's talking to Theon. He's like, very sarcastic and dry there. Nothing prettier than watching sailors burn alive. Yeah, which, of course, once we get to Season 2's ending... Oh yeah, that will come back up, because the way he plays in there is definitely going to call back to that. It's not pretty, but if you use the old phrase, the needs must when the devil drives. Oh no, this is another fun episode. Going back and rewatching it, I'm remembering just how good these early seasons of Game of Thrones were, which is why I'm like, oh, the writing was so good, the pacing was good, even though they abridged the story. It's like, oh, it's a shame, but that's what happens when you start adapting a story before it's 100% complete. You got to start changing the pacing, especially if you're cutting out important stuff, or stuff that you don't think is important, but it turns out later might be important. But that time thing is a whole other topic for a whole other day. All right, till next time, guys.